Hi, everyone. Welcome back for another episode of Let's Talk Change, where I am here taking your questions around organizational change management. Let's jump in. Today's question focuses around a user pilot, and someone wants to know how important is doing a user pilot? Adding that they usually just validate a new change within IT or a few key stakeholders and then call it good and push it out to the rest of an organization. So now they're starting to think, wait a minute, like, do we have to test with end users as well? So let's discuss. Now, before I offer my insights, I'm going to answer that question with a couple of other questions. Don't you just love it when someone answers a question with more questions? So here's some questions for you. Would you buy a new car or make any big purchase, without first taking it for a test drive or sampling it, right? Think of all those companies and services that offer a 14-day free trial. So would you buy something and invest in something without trying it first? How about this? If you are someone who typically tests a change within IT or with a few key stakeholders, does that user group truly represent your actual end users that are going to be impacted by this change? Next question. Does your organization have ample resources, meaning the time, the money, and staffing to handle an influx of pushback or questions or support needed to help users through the change? And then lastly, are you willing to just keep changing up your strategy until you find something that just clicks with your end users? Now, if you answered no to any or all of these, then I say yes, you probably do need or could benefit from doing a user pilot. So let's talk about what that actually means. Now, I like to think about a user pilot as kind of like a dress rehearsal before a big play, right? You don't go on Broadway and just start performing without doing a lot of dress rehearsals and test runs first. So I think about a user pilot in the same way. The first thing you want to think through is that a user pilot should mimic the exact experience an end user is going to go through. This is much more than just turning it on and waiting a week, and if no one says anything, you think you have the thumbs up to keep moving. What you really want to do is say, what is the user experience going to be like? If you're deploying a new technology, what does that look like from a technical user experience perspective? If you're enabling a different process and going through a process change, what does that look like? What forms are different, or what applications are different? And then what about user readiness? Do you have the right messaging or training plans in place? Are they resonating with your users? So a user pilot is really about testing the exact end-to-end experience, the technology, the training, the awareness, the support. Personally, when I do a user pilot, I always say, come up with a couple of fake questions that you think the users are going to have, and then have your pilot users call the help desk and make sure the help desk is ready to answer those calls. Because again, you want to make sure that all of the different pieces are coming together so that your pilot is truly representative of what your broader organization will experience, which means it is really important to design a formal test plan. Simply turning something on and hoping for the best and then saying, well, if we don't hear, anything back, right? No news is good news. If we don't hear anything, we'll just assume all is well and good. And that is not usually the case. So design a formal test plan, exactly what you want the users to go through. Let them know, because it's not that they don't want to help, they just don't know what you're looking for. So create a test plan that outlines all of the different things they want you to do, such as the example I gave you just a moment ago about calling the help desk with a specific question, and then make sure that you have an explicit feedback loop, which means you can create user surveys or hold focus groups. You want to give users a way to complete the testing, give you the feedback, and then the loop means that you take time to analyze that feedback and then go back to the users, iterate on the plan. Maybe you're extending your pilot to more users, but you want to have an entire loop so that as you're testing, you're assessing all of the different components, you're iterating, you're changing it up, and then you're expanding upon what you're doing. which means you want to set very clear go, no go decision points, right? Think about the example I gave on the previous slide about taking a car for a test drive. Chances are, if you're out in the market for a new car, you have a list of requirements, right? Those are your go, no go decision points. The car has to do A, B, and C. It has to, ride a certain way and get a certain miles per gallon. So have those go, no go decision points for your change project, and then use those as measurements to determine if you are in fact ready to move forward onto the next phase. And maybe your next phase is expanding the pilot, or maybe your next phase is then enabling that change for your entire organization. Make sure your goals are SMART, which means they're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable. You don't want to set unrealistic goals, right? So they have to be realistic, they have to be timely. So make sure that you have specific and hardcore goals in place with clear no-go decision, no-go decision points, so that you know if and when you're ready to move forward. Make sure that your pilot users are truly representative of your user base. Very often, I find that organizations, let's say they're rolling out a new technology, well, they leverage IT as the pilot users. They leverage the people that are actually deploying the technology to test the technology. Not usually a good representation of what a typical end user is going to go through. The same for process. I had an organization who was rolling out a new procurement process for onboarding vendors. And they used the procurement team to go through the process. Procurement's not the one filling out those forms every day. So make sure that your pilot users represent the people who will actually be using the technology or the process on a day-to-day basis. Make sure you allow ample time to validate. I have organizations that will say, oh, well, we're going to do a pilot for a week. That's not enough time to validate. 30 days, in my opinion, 30 days is a minimum that you want to allow for a user pilot, because again, you want to have that test plan. You want to not have that test plan be all consuming because they're still doing their day-to-day jobs. So allow time for users to validate, for you to get the feedback, for you to measure the analysis and iterate on the feedback. So you really want to give time to come full circle in that pilot. So personally, I think 30 days is a good benchmark, 60 days if it's a bigger project. All depends on your timing, but definitely make sure if you're taking time to invest in a user pilot, make sure you have the time to put into making sure it's a success. And then lastly, don't try to have a pilot that's 50% of your organization, unless you're a really small organization. Start small, right? Start with a handful of people. A good example, if you're switching technologies, find out who your top users are of your current technology, bring them on board. If you're enlisting a new, let's say, sales process, right? You're going through a new sales system, right? Find out who some of your top sales reps are and bring them along, right? So get the people that are using this technology or this process day in and day out and start with them, expand from there. Personally, I like to also include laggards. I like to know that if there's a group of people in my organization, and we all know who they are, right, that like to push back, that just like to push back for the sake of pushing back, right, I encourage them to join the pilot. It makes them feel like they're part of something, like they're part of the solution. And if you could get your laggards, those people who push back, to convert over, the rest of your project is going to be so much easier. So I know a lot of organizations like to wait for the laggards until last. I like to bring them in first. It makes them feel like they're getting a little bit more attention as well. It also gives you a good idea of what kind of pushback you might anticipate so that you can proactively address it to the rest of your organization. Now, there is one big question we have to address when it comes to doing a user pilot. And that is, what if you simply don't have the luxury of doing a user pilot? You see the benefit of it, but you don't have the time needed to put together an effective pilot. A great example of this is the work from home mandate that was enacted upon us back in March of 2020. Organizations weren't given 60 days notice to plan and prepare to get all of their employees to work from home. They were given 24 hours, maybe a week, to say, hey, guess what? You have to shut your office doors and your entire workforce now needs to work from home. So if you find yourself in a situation like that, because chances are those unplanned changes may come upon you again in the future. What can you do? How do you plan for something like that when you simply don't have the luxury of doing a user pilot? The first thing I recommend, communicate, communicate, communicate. Communicate early. Now, as early as you can, right? I get you may not have 30 days notice or whatever that looks like, but communicate as early as possible to let users know what is going on. One of the reasons users push back a lot on any type of change that's happening in your organization is because they don't have enough information. And think about this, think about anything in your life. If you're not given enough information, you form your own opinion about what's changing and why it's changing and what it means to you. And usually those analyses that you go through on your own are not good, right? There's always a bad outcome. You're always thinking the worst. So communicate what's happening, even if you don't have all of the information. That's okay. Let users know we're figuring this out as we go. I like to say we're building the plane as we fly, right? You're trying to unfold all of the details, but you're going to work together on it and you're going to keep them informed. So communicate early, communicate often, right? There's never a way that you can over communicate in a situation like this. And then communicate as many details as you can. Now, you don't have to go into all of the gory details, but enough to keep them informed so that their anxiety goes down just a little bit. And then it brings me to the second tip of making sure that you have enough support for these users because they will have questions, they need to know where to go. So make sure your help desk knows that, hey, you know what, you might see a big uptick in questions. Put together an FAQ. As you start getting more answers, create an FAQ. Create enough resources so that your users have a place to go when they have these questions. Again, it helps them feel supported through this unforeseen and unexpected change. And then next, make sure you're measuring and adjusting as you go. I gave the analogy a second ago about building the plane as you fly. That's exactly kind of what you're doing in a situation like this. So make sure you're measuring, you're figuring out what pieces are missing, and you're working to get those pieces brought in. And you're adjusting your plan as you go. It's a great way to bring in agile change management, right? You're doing a little change, measuring, moving on to the next change, so on and so forth. And you just keep going. It's kind of running a pilot as you're deploying to your whole organization, right? Because everyone's affected. And then as you make those changes, as you're iterating on your change plan, communicate what those are to your users. So communicate those details. So you can see it kind of comes full circle. So communicate, make users feel supported, and then make sure you're adjusting as you go because you're learning just as much as your users are learning, right? So you want to build that and fold that into your plan as you move along. Now, it is a really good idea to plan for unplanned change. And there are things that you can do to prepare in advance so that you are as ready as you can possibly be for when those unplanned changes come along. It's kind of like your emergency prepared kit, right? Preparedness kit, right? You're always ready for something, as ready as you can be. So I'm going to have a video coming up on planning for unplanned change. So stay tuned for that. So hopefully that gives you some tips on the importance of a user pilot and how you can get started designing your own pilot for a change that you have going on in your own organization. And if you're finding these videos helpful, go ahead and like them, subscribe to my channel, let me know what you think. Check out those additional videos that are already posted, as well as stay tuned for those that are forthcoming. And if you have a question that you'd like me to consider for one of these videos, just submit that at aka.my/question. And with that, I am logging off. Thanks again for joining. We'll see you next time.